Great, we started with a small IT glitch, so we're sharpening our talons, and hopefully you can hear me at the back, but just stick a hand up and I'll shout a bit louder. We're talking about better practice, smarter practice, opportunities for the future of architecture in particular. I suppose by that we might mean better buildings, better places, better construction, smarter of all of the above. I suppose there's a plethora of reports out there about modernising or dying by non-architects, pointing out how the industry is in a bit of difficulty. And I suppose if we're living in exciting and exhilarating political times, I suppose that's one way of positive spin on it, and if architecture is always political, then it follows perhaps that we're in exciting architectural times. Hopefully you've seen some of that today. I'm pretty sure Robert's going to be much more exciting afterwards, but I'm just going to try and cover some of the things that we've been doing as a practice over recent years. Quite a long time. It's taken us a while to get here, but hopefully it will give you some indications of some of the possibilities that are out there to address some of the questions that I've just posed about how to deal with that excitement. Just a bit about us. We're 185 staff and we're in quite a few cities, and we're a housing practice. We only do housing, so we're quite specialist in that regard. We house people in a variety of places. We work in regeneration, a difficult area at the moment, a very politically charged area. This is the Aylesbury estate in Southwark. Has had a lot of press, but ultimately is progressing and is about delivering better housing for the communities that live there. We try and work with house builders. Volume house builders are delivering a lot of our housing. They get an awful lot of bad press, and they have done a little bit today, but we try and work with them as best we can to deliver the very best possible outcome for housing people through better design, adding value through design, demonstrating that architects have something to offer. Something has gone live during that sentence. We're architects. We're specialists in that we're housing people, but we are architects, landscape architects, planners, researchers, graphic designers, visualizers, web designers, sustainability consultants and engagement specialists, but all in the world of housing. So I guess it's not that surprising that we have focused over the years on particular areas of specialism, because our reach, if you like, in the design world is possibly narrower than many practices would ordinarily go for. So our roots in off-site construction and focusing on modular build, which will be the main focus of today, go back quite a long way. I joined the practice in 1998. This scheme had just been won in competition. It's Greenwich Millennium Village, it's GMV. It's not really associated with our practice particularly because we were sacked. Because it was a huge disappointment in delivering the expectations of the bid, that it would be modular, that it would be built rapidly, that it would be very modern, that it would be flexible, it would be dynamic, that you could move into a one-bedroom flat and then you could expand and have a two-bedroom and then increase to a three-bedroom, you have a maisonette. The whole sort of aspiration of sustainability was embodied in this project, which is why I went to work for the practice that I now run. As I say, it was a disappointment. It's concrete frame, it's very inflexible, it's sold off in the normal way. But a lot of the ideas that were put into that originally have developed through the practice, through our thinking, through the projects that we pursued and the ideas that we have explored. We had a bit more success at the suburban level. It's kind of easier, it's less risky. People are a little bit more inclined to have a go, and there's a few more housing associations in amongst the mix, and they've always been quite good at trying a risk or two. Think about Peabody, Murray Grove, those sorts of projects where they were almost bankrupted, but they did disrupt the industry and change the future. So this was an early custom-built prototype. This is in Basingstoke. Two-storey housing, regeneration, replacing existing estate. The idea being, you can see at the bottom there, you could get your standard steel frame house built in the factory to the highest quality, and online you could buy a bay window or a double bay, a dormer window, all those sorts of exciting features, and you'd pay a little bit more, and the outline consent would cover any variety of possibilities so that the individual purchaser could do it. Now, the website wasn't very successful because websites weren't very good back in the early 2000s, and the planning authority wouldn't accept anything that wasn't fully designed at 1 to 10. So we didn't actually get the consent that we were pursuing. It didn't really work. But then again, the idea was there, the thinking that pervaded through the future work in the practice got us going. Actually looks like quite ordinary housing. It is quite ordinary housing. It was affordable housing for a Basingstoke Housing Association, but it's very high-tech. It's steel frame inside, and the various elements were built as elemental parts in factories around the southwest and brought into site in different combinations. tide began to change in our favour a little bit. We thought, right, we're onto a roll here, and John Prescott brought out the Design for Manufacture competition. Some of you will remember it, some of you will recall it was the 60K house. It got subverted a little bit, but it was launched as the Design for Manufacturer. We got together with Barratt Homes at the time. We just started to try and work with them as a house builder. They had the advanced housing system in Northampton, which was a joint venture with Terrapin, and we developed a whole set of modular approaches with panels and pods that would configure in different ways to design and deliver housing of ultimate variation and flexibility. So we worked through the planning stage of both projects that we had secured through the competition. During that period, they closed the advanced factory, withdrawing from off-site manufacturer altogether, but we did get into a relationship with a third-party, Kingspan at the time, who helped deliver it all. And we learned some lessons, and we built some pretty good housing with a house builder, which won quite a lot of awards and was very well received. That took us then on to a sort of step, and just goes to show how slow and how long this can take. You know, start with a small idea, have a few failures, pick yourself up, try it again, keep assessing your idea for its sort of legitimacy, for its commercial value. Is it adding anything to the development process? Or is it just design ideas? Are you making a house bigger than it needs to be, rather than actually working to make the house as good as it possibly can be within the limited space that you have? So we went on to do the Carbon Challenge, another John Prescott initiative, and we did this again with Barratt, and this time we had Kingspan in the room from the outset. So we set off, we had a bid idea for how the housing would be reorientated. There were loads of other factors in terms of the first Code of Sustainable Homes Level 6. It was the first of 6 much trumpeted Carbon Challenge sites. This was in South Gloucestershire, just on the outskirts of the city. We developed that through the process. Into a different arrangement. What the first house shows is that architects always like to turn the house upside down. They put the bedrooms on the ground floor and the living room in the roof. You can have a cathedral ceiling, make the most of the volume. That's a way of adding value. House builder's not so keen. It's a bit risky. I'm not sure. Will anybody buy it? They always do, by the way. We do it all the time. They always do. So we flip them on the side. And the first version in the bid put all the living rooms to the front. That was a great idea. You looked out onto the street. Bedrooms to the back. The actual version we built in the end down the left-hand side flipped them about 90 degrees. So the living rooms were both through rooms, front to back, and the bedrooms were side by side through front to back as well. So we've got extra cross ventilation, actually much, much simpler to build. Barratt did a very clever thing. They handed over the responsibility for the building envelope to Kingspan, so they delivered all the windows. They had to achieve the air tightness. It was a punishing 1.5 target. We managed 0.8 in the very first house we built, and every house went very straightforward since then. We did a beautiful CGI, which then actually had to be delivered as the final scheme. Slightly different angle. We need to get back with a drone and take the aerial view. But it outperformed in every performance area that we were expecting to. And we expected these to be rolled out across the country as the new answer to suburban housing. It's probably the only one that exists at the moment. You don't see them anywhere else, but all of the houses inside, the actual basic of the core of the house, has begun to emerge and be developed in other areas. So again, slow steps, use your ideas, get them built in small areas, and then keep going. So at the time then, we were looking at different formats of construction. There's the basic brick, that's an off-site manufactured element. There are frame systems, there are panels, and then through to smaller pods, and overall volumetric, where the entirety of a room or a part of a room is fitted out in a factory and brought to site. These have what we call pre-manufactured value, and at 40%, most buildings are about 40%. You have quite a lot of things like windows and bricks have already been made in a factory, through to modular, where still quite a bit of concrete might be done on site, but a lot of it is done in the factory. That can be up to about 80%. So whilst all of that suburban stuff was going, we were working in Wembley, getting a consent for a scheme on the left-hand side, which has quite a good view of the stadium. We're working with a developer who also owned Vision Modular Systems. At the time, it was just about getting a consent. We got that consent, and everybody went quiet because it was 2009. But they came back a little while later and said, actually, we're going to build this now. We're going to build it using the factory that we've now re-established from Cork over in Bedford. You'll notice it's not very rectangular. There's a slightly oval tower. There's a pointy triangular corner. It hadn't really been designed with modular in mind. It had been designed to maximize the consent, those points to get things like daylight into the courtyard and to maximize the views from the tower. But actually, we designed the whole thing through the modular factory, and it was all built by the modular system. Everything above the grey fascia at the lower level, which is concrete frame up to that point, is entirely modular above. So we managed to do some quite remarkable things. What that did then was give us a relationship with a manufacturer who sees no benefit in switching his architect from planning to working drawing stage, because during the planning stage, you're spending a lot of your time resolving the complicated issues of layout, of construction, of connection, that will enable the project to be delivered very rapidly after you've got consent. There's no real purpose if you're a manufacturer in getting consent for a project and then selling it on. That's not really going to do much for keeping your bodies in your factory. So as a business model, we began to see the benefit to us as a practice of keeping close to the projects we're involved in at the early stage, developing that technical expertise from the very beginning of the project, from inception. So we weren't doing simple CGIs of what the project might look like. We were at the same time working out quite detailed layouts of how the project would be constructed. And we took that on to some future phases. So when we were doing the project you've just seen, it's the one in detail, Schubert House on the left, the council said, well, what we need to see is a master plan for the whole site. That's what we need to see, to how you would complete the urban block. We said, well, we'll do that, but it's a bit nonsense. I mean, we're never going to get to build the rest of the block, obviously. So we did. They bought Apex House because they thought, well, we've done a really good job of Schubert. That's going to go really well. We can deliver some student housing. The previous scheme was a mixture of private sale housing, which was actually bought by a PRS investor, one of the early signs of that coming good. Some affordable housing and a hotel. But this was designated for student housing. So as you can see here, not all rectangular modules, some triangles on the corner. This was really driven by the planning consent that existed at the time that the council wanted us to work within their envelope. So came up with a scheme. We got a few more stories on top, and we built this in 14 months. It's about 450 student rooms. That was about half the time we'd taken for the previous project. So the developer and the manufacturer and ourselves were beginning to see real benefits from working together repeatedly. We understood the rules of the system. They were keen for us to push it and demonstrate that modular wasn't, you can have any shape you want, providing it's rectangular. That was what many of the modular manufacturers of previous decades had really suffered from. And where they became showcases for how this system could be developed and deliver better accommodation. At the same time then, as well as sort of getting onto this good process where we always took the project from beginning to end, developers began to buy projects with consent and bring us in to try and use our expertise to modularize an already existing building. This was by John McCaslin. It was another student scheme. It's also in Wembley. Actually had a leisure centre at the bottom. And again, in the world of mixed use, as high-density communities in quite central city locations are having to bring together different uses, the opportunity for a modular manufacturer that can create a concrete deck, a transfer slab with pretty much anything underneath it, and then crane on reasonably lightweight modules on top in rapid time, about half the time it would normally take to deliver through traditional build, became quite a benefit. Also, the floor-to-ceiling in the modular system we were using, floor-to-floor height was about 2.85 to give the 2.5 clear that you require, compared to the 3.1 consent. So we got an extra 2 floors on top within the consented parameters through a Section 73 notification. So those sorts of ways, again representing how the architect brings value into the process for the developer, improving design outcomes, but also improving the commercial return for the developer. And then there were 3 sites in that site plan I showed you a little while ago. They managed to acquire, the same developer managed to acquire this corner site, which had consent for, within the master plan, for a 10-storey high scheme. So they acquired the site in April 2015, a bit before. We got going in April 2015. By June 2015, we'd been to CABE and said, look, this isn't really the right height for a site like this. It's right on the corner. It's a prominent arrival point from the city. And also, there's a consent for a 38-storey tower just the other side of the road. So CABE backed a height of 28 stories. We took it through to a planning application in August, and June the following year we had a consent, which we then built. So they started on site in October 2016. The concrete core that you can see went up there, and the transfer slab up to the ground floor level, above ground floor level, was finished just after Christmas so that the modules could begin to arrive. They were arriving around about 8 a day. They come down from Bedford. Panels are fabricated in China, shipped over, assembled in Bedford, fitted out, plasterboard, electrics, plumbing, painting, TVs on the wall, fitted furniture installed. They were going up about a floor a week or something of that order. And by June, actually, we had broadly finished the modules, and then the project was clad. Now, that brings us to another sort of point about the role of the architect in this sort of process. Modular buildings are, underneath, quite boring looking things. You can see by the stacking up of the boxes. Actually, student housing and hotels, they're quite boring things too, because there's very little variety in what's behind the skin. So actually, the modular manufacturer is hoping to build very big buildings, because above 6, 10, 20 stories, the economics of it become more and more compelling. And they're hoping to be able to build them in quite a simple, straightforward, stacked way, which means that we have to be incredibly creative with cladding solutions. At the same time, because you're building it quickly, the crane is very, very busy all of the time. It's usually a compact site, that's best for modular. Crane's very busy loading the modules on, so it hasn't got much time to lift big, heavy bits of cladding. So you have to do all the cladding from mast climbers, you can see on the second left picture, and all of the cladding modules have to be carried by 2 men. So all of those sorts of constraints you get quite used to. You get to learn a little bit about what's driving the building and the design decisions. And actually, that's where the creativity comes from. The idea that you take a building and then you try and hang on to some of your ideas whilst it gets modularized is entirely the wrong way to look at it. You have to look at it as, these are the key constraints. How creative can we be within that and get the right outcome? That's a typical module. This isn't a technical talk. I can do that another day. The modules are fully fitted with internally, and then you can see the corridor is open. So once the modules are all stacked up, the corridors can be finished in one. But the rooms inside, they have the doors locked in the factory, finished off. And a site like this, delivering, I think, 520 student rooms, about 600 modules on site, has about 12 people on site. So actually, it's a very well, tidy, organised site. There's a lot less disruption for local neighbours because the thing happens very, very quickly, and there aren't loads and loads of vans coming around. The local cafe was disappointed because they were expecting hordes of workmen to come and really fill their order books for a year. And so, as you can see, we did complete the block, albeit the Felder House, the second one we did, was quite a different form. But it was an unusual moment to go back and say, well, we started here with 3 sheds and completed the whole lot. And there they are. The spirally thing in the background has nothing to do with us, but it actually was a modular building as well. So Wembley is leading the charge in the modular world, but you can see the 3 other projects that have been delivered by us. And an aerial perspective puts all 4 of them together within Wembley. So we feel Wembley may be almost done. But just to touch on other benefits for the practice, what we tend to do, the blue curve here, important to have a graph as an architect, is a traditional project that was done about the same time as Felder House, the second silvery one I showed you. So you spend a lot of time doing your production information, your working drawings, and broadly similar amount of time spent in the modular world. And then you get to site with a traditional build, and you spend a huge amount of time, about the same amount of time again, going back, making it slightly less good, dealing with problems from the subcontractor, similar approved materials, can we use something a bit cheaper? We'll have to get back to planning. No one really wants to pay you for that. You've agreed a fairly light fee, half a day a week for the first 6 months, and you just bleed the whole lot of fee away. No one really likes you for it. You're desperately unpopular. The modular world is entirely different to that. They have no interest at all in changing anything once they get to site, because that upsets their own supply chain process, which is really well established. You spend almost no time at all, pop along, just check everything's satisfactory, and lo and behold, everybody comes out much happier. Of course, the canny developers in the room say, does that mean your fees are a bit lower? Well, actually, yes, they are, but we still make more profit, because we actually don't have to spend a lot of time. We don't have to charge a huge amount of time for fees on site, but we would only say they are lower with manufacturers that we're well accustomed to working with, because it's not always the case. And so a good non-specific, no numbers graph, that's the growth of value of off-site projects in the office since 2013 to 2017. It is undergoing a revolution, and it is a very good time to join this part of the industry. It is the future for our industry, for construction as a whole. Skills are bleeding out of the workforce. People don't want to work on building sites anymore. They don't want to travel to Kingston for 2 years and then suddenly have to move to Didcot. They want to stay, put down roots. They want to work in a factory which is nearby, which is warm, which has iPads, which has healthy and safe environments. It is absolutely the future. And the benefits, it might be a bit more expensive, but if you can finish a student housing scheme a whole year earlier than somebody else, you get a whole academic year of rent out of it. And in Felder House, that was £5.3 million of income. So finally, we began to get quite recognised for this. We won quite a lot of awards, not just for projects, but for our thinking and investigations into this area. So things like the AJ Best Use of Technology, AJ Business Breakthrough. One begins to see these things converging in other areas. Custom build, I spoke about a little bit at the beginning. That is now beginning to happen. I absolutely agree with Isabel Allen. It's not about the factors that everybody is saying it's about, but the construction methodology is incredibly important. Actually beginning to deliver projects in more sensitive environments, not always being 28 stories. This is in a conservation area, but it's modular build and it's on site at the moment. Making sure that your external envelope can be delivered in traditional materials. Building projects for other people. This is for Essential Living. We didn't design it, but they came to us to help deliver a modular solution. The implications of BIM are quite significant. And there's a module. Looks pretty finished on the inside, but look at the outside. It's pretty low tech. It's not robots building things like Lang O'Rourke might tell you. So actually, there's not a big barrier to entry into this market. And there the convergence obviously lies. Build to rent, the benefit of finishing buildings quickly and early that can then be rented as soon as they're finished. And modular build, where the long-term defects and management costs are much more controllable, is the future. And I'll leave you with our future, which is our current project. So Apex House is the tallest modular building in Europe by height and by stories. Don't let Metropolitan Workshop tell you otherwise. This is the tallest residential building in the world. It's 45 stories. It's in planning. We're hopeful of a good outcome in a week's time, and it'll start on site a week later. But don't let anybody tell you that because it's modular and because it's built by manufacturers, they don't need architects. They absolutely want architects, and they need them to the core of their business. Sorry.
Great. Thank you.